If you're under 25, you probably know Will Smith from two things: AI spaghetti eating and the slap heard round the world. But if you grew up in the 90s, one thing comes to mind: Fresh Prince. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was one of the biggest shows of its time with a massive cultural ripple effect we still feel today. But there was also a ton of drama behind the scenes and one of the most unusual origin stories I've ever come across, which led to the greatness we witnessed and the chaos that left some huge scars that lasted decades. This is the rise, the drama, and the aftermath of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Now, before we get into it, hit that like button if you've ever secretly done the Carlton dance, and subscribe for more retro TV deep dives. So in 1989, Will Smith was 20 and one of the most exciting young names in hip-hop. He and DJ Jazzy Jeff had just won the very first Grammy awarded for rap. Parents Just Don't Understand was everywhere. He had earned an estimated $6 million and had a future that looked limitless. What he didn't have, though, was an accountant or a financial advisor. He burned through that money on Gucci, fancy cars, and an entourage, while at the same time not paying Uncle Sam for 2 years. And he got slapped by the IRS for $2.8 million owing in back taxes. And with that, and a bunch of repo men, one of the most recognizable faces in music was essentially broke and faced the very real possibility of federal prosecution for tax evasion. Naturally, owing $2.8 million would make one feel kinda down, but his girlfriend at the time snapped him out of it, told him to stop moping, get out of the house, and network. So he went to tapings of the Arsenio Hall show to do just that, and backstage, one of those nights, by chance, he ran into a man named Benny Medina. Medina was a music manager and a Warner Brothers executive, and he had a pitch. It was based on his own life. He'd grown up poor in East LA, but as a teenager, he'd been taken in by a wealthy white family in Beverly Hills. The culture clash, the fish out of water experience, the class divide, he thought it would make for great TV. But he'd updated the concept: make the rich family black instead of white. That way, we could explore black on black prejudice as well as black class differences, Medina later said. And the moment he saw Will Smith standing backstage at Arsenio, he thought he had found his lead. Now, Medina had already pitched the concept to Quincy Jones, who had just signed a development deal with Warner Brothers. And here's where all of their paths collided in the craziest way imaginable. Medina invited Will to come meet Quincy at a party at his house in December 1989. Will showed up thinking it would be a great place to network, knowing that he was being considered for Medina's show. But what he was not ready for was what was about to happen. Quincy Jones had been, in Will's words, tasting the libations and was in a celebratory mood. And when he saw Will walk through the door, he did something pretty spur of the moment. He pulled Will aside, grabbed a script, introduced him to Brandon Tartikoff, the head of NBC, then told Will to audition, right there, in front of everyone. Will, naturally, panicked. He begged for 3 weeks to prepare. I mean, you gotta remember, he'd never acted a day in his life. Quincy's response: you can take 3 weeks and prepare, or you can take 10 minutes right now and change your life forever. Will went into a hallway, skimmed that random pilot script, walked back out, and performed. The room, full of celebrities, industry executives, and politicians, gave him a standing ovation. Quincy called his lawyers, and before the party was over, the initial contract for what would become the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was drawn up in a limousine parked on the street outside Quincy Jones's house. It doesn't get much wilder than that, and from there, the rest of the pieces were put together. The pilot was written, cast, and taped in roughly 3 weeks. It was written by Andy Borowitz, who, fun fact, based Will's cousins on Quincy Jones's own daughters, one of those daughters being Rashida Jones, who would later star in The Office and Parks and Rec. And he named the character Carlton after his real-life friend, Carlton Cuse. As far as casting goes, unlike Will, who had no training, the rest of the castmates were trained professionals. James Avery, cast as Uncle Phil, was a Shakespearean stage actor with serious classical training. When he was approached to play a sitcom character based around a rapper, he almost said no, thinking it was beneath him, and only agreed to meet about it after hearing that Quincy Jones was behind it. And then something happened in that audition room that sealed the deal. Will Smith was sitting with his feet up on the table, hat turned sideways. James Avery walks in, takes one look at him, and doesn't even pick up the script. He just boomed, "Put your feet down, turn your hat around." And Will immediately obeyed. The producers saw a natural father-son authority dynamic play out in real time, unrehearsed, and hired Avery on the spot. Alfonso Ribeiro, who played Carlton, was not what they were originally looking for. The producers had initially wanted a more serious, buttoned-up actor. Alfonso won them over, though, with his natural chemistry with Will and the fact that, as a professional dancer, he could lean into Carlton's awkwardness in a way that felt both intentional and hilarious. Another fun fact, that Carlton dance was a mix of Courtney Cox's moment in the Bruce Springsteen Dancing in the Dark music video and Eddie Murphy's White Man Dance bit from his Delirious stand-up special. Now let's go to Janet Hubert, cast as Aunt Viv, who was a Juilliard-trained Broadway actress. She had real stage credits, real technique, and real professional expectations about how a set should run. We'll see how that played out in a few minutes. And even Tatiana Ali, who played Ashley Banks, was a 6-year veteran of the industry, having started on Sesame Street at the age of 6. As for Karen Parsons, who played the spoiled and self-absorbed Hillary, her character almost didn't exist. Brandon Tartikoff told the show's creators, Andy and Susan Borowitz, to cut the character of Hillary entirely, but Andy told Brandon to wait for Karen, and she won everyone over with her bratty Malibu Kid act that wasn't even the original persona for Hillary. And then there was DJ Jazzy Jeff, Will's real-life best friend, cast as Jazz, the recurring comedic punching bag who got thrown out of the Banks mansion on a regular basis. Another fun fact, that iconic shot of Jazz being physically tossed out of the house was filmed just once, and then the production reused that same footage for the rest of the series. So every time Jazz got thrown out, regardless of what he was wearing in that episode moments before, he's in that same shirt. And of course, there was Jeffrey the Butler. Now this was one of the harder roles to cast because the producers needed an actor who could deliver lines with an authentic, dry wit. They expanded their search to the UK, where they landed Joseph Marcel, a highly respected member of the Royal Shakespeare Company. While the producers were initially hesitant, unsure how a British butler would fit into the family dynamic, James Avery, a fellow Shakespearean actor who had studied in London, advocated for the choice. He knew Marcel's presence would elevate the show's sophistication and add a unique layer of diversity to the cast. The show premiered on September 10, 1990, and it was an immediate hit, finishing as the highest-rated new sitcom of the season. Which was great news for Will because the IRS was garnishing, get this, 70% of his wages, and he desperately needed this show to go as long as possible. And that pressure manifested into greatness, as we'll see, but also on-set conflict. He was so terrified of dropping his lines that he memorized not just his lines, but everyone else's. So when the other actors were delivering their lines on set, Will's lips were moving. Go back and watch it, you can't unsee it. And it drove the trained actors nuts. For a Juilliard graduate like Janet Hubert, watching the lead of the show silently lip sync your dialogue while you were delivering it was maddening, and it created friction almost instantly, and there's a lot more of that coming up. James Avery, however, handled it differently. Where others saw an amateur in over his head, Avery saw a kid who just needed direction. His message was blunt: you have a responsibility to elevate your craft. And Will responded. Over the course of season 1, he started to grow. The lip syncing faded and his performances got stronger, but the tension with Janet Hubert only got worse. Where season 1 was a great start, season 2 was where the show hit its stride. The writers leaned hard into the Will and Carlton dynamic and the natural comedy of a street-smart kid from the hood clashing with a rich, uptight preppy. The ratings responded immediately. Season 2 jumped to 18th in the national rankings, over 20 million viewers a week. And the good times continued into season 3 when it hit number 16 in the Nielsen's. Between the merch and the fashion, the show was a cultural phenomenon, and Will Smith was a star. But as always, a hit show has to have some conflict, something has to go wrong, and in this case, Janet Hubert got pregnant. Now, I want to be clear, her being pregnant wasn't the problem. The writers actually wrote it into the show, but it was an inflection point. Behind the scenes, the relationship between Hubert and the producers had already fractured. The tension between her and Will had been simmering since day one. And at this point, Will had all the leverage. So the studio offered Hubert a bad deal for season 4, which reduced her work week and salary significantly and prevented her from taking other jobs. She refused to sign it, and Will did not stand up for her. In fact, he went to the producers with his own frustrations. As a result, after season 3, Janet Hubert was gone, replaced by actress Daphne Maxwell Reid, who stepped into the role of Vivian Banks for the show's final 3 seasons. And while Will didn't necessarily get Hubert fired, his next move would essentially nuke her career. He went on a radio show and told the world that Hubert wanted the show to be the Aunt Viv of Bel-Air show, and he said she had an attitude problem. Now, in the pre-internet era, that kind of public statement from the star of a hit show carried enormous weight, and Hubert later said those comments blackballed her from the industry for nearly 27 years. Her career, which had been built on real training and real credits, effectively stopped. With the new Aunt Viv and Baby Nikki, the show continued to be a hit. It was also during this stretch that one of the most important scenes in Will Smith's career was filmed. In the episode, Papa's Got a Brand New Excuse, Will's father shows up, gets close to him again, and then leaves again. Now, a common legend is that the scene was unscripted, which isn't true. But the raw emotion was real. Smith's line, "How come he don't want me, man?" was a professional breakthrough. And the hug that followed, where James Avery wrapped his arms around him, was a moment of genuine connection. Fun fact again, Avery whispered in Will's ear as he held him, "That's acting right there." This was the moment the industry realized Will Smith was not just a rapper who could hold a sitcom together, he could act, really act. And producers were convinced that Will Smith had a big future in film. And that, in part, led to a big decision by NBC. Because of Will's desire to do film, a shift in creative direction, and declining ratings, which were still 21st overall, so I don't really understand that part. Anyway, NBC canceled the show. Most people don't know that the episode The Philadelphia Story, the season 4 finale, was written and filmed as the series finale. Will decides to stay in Philadelphia, the show ends, the Banks family says goodbye. But then the letters started arriving at NBC's front porch in protest. And the outcry was loud enough that the network reversed course. Fresh Prince was renewed. But really, this was the beginning of the end. Because during that hiatus between season 4 and 5, Will Smith filmed Bad Boys. When he came back, he was a different person. Bad Boys became a massive hit, and Will was now basically a movie star doing TV on the side. It reminds me a lot of what happened with Moonlighting after Bruce Willis did Die Hard. The dynamic changed and the show collapsed. And in season 5, Fresh Prince cratered in the ratings to 55th. The plots were getting desperate. The episode where Carlton starts carrying a gun after Will gets shot, Will himself later identified that as the precise moment he knew the show had run out of road. And things only got worse. In season 6, Will was filming Independence Day. He was missing rehearsals. The plot lines got worse. And things could have got ugly had guest star John Amos not told Will in season 5 about how he was fired from Good Times, encouraging Will to end things on his terms. And shortly after, Will gathered his co-stars and told them the 6th season would be their last. On May 20th, 1996, after 148 episodes, the Banks family moved out of the Bel-Air mansion and Fresh Prince was done. Now, we all know what happened to Will Smith after the show ended. He became one of the most bankable movie stars on the planet through the late 90s and 2000s, eventually earning an Oscar for Best Actor for King Richard in 2022, right after he slapped Chris Rock. Alfonso Ribeiro hosted America's Funniest Home Videos for years and won Dancing with the Stars, which is fitting. Tatiana Ali had a gold record with Will Smith's help before stepping away to earn a degree in Afro-American Studies and Government from Harvard University. Karen Parsons founded the nonprofit Sweet Blackberry to produce animated films about overlooked Black history for children and is now an accomplished author of award-winning middle-grade novels. Quite the opposite of the vapid socialite she played for 6 years. Daphne Maxwell Reid transitioned into a successful second career as a professional photographer and travel writer. DJ Jazzy Jeff continued making music and built a respected career as a DJ and producer. And James Avery continued working steadily in film and television after Fresh Prince ended. Sadly, he passed away in January 2014 at the age of 68, and for many fans, his passing really stung. And perhaps that speaks to the broader legacy of the show. Yes, it brought hip-hop and 90s street culture into living rooms that had never encountered it before, a normalization that mattered more than people gave it credit for at the time. And of course, it tackled serious issues like economic equality, fatherhood and abandonment, and what it meant to grow up Black in America at different rungs of the class ladder, all while making you laugh. But James Avery's portrayal of Philip Banks was special. He was stern and he was tender, the kind of father Will's character desperately needed, and we all love that about him. In that way, he was really the glue of the show in many ways. And of course, I cannot end this without addressing the Janet Hubert Will Smith aftermath. She has spoken extensively about the years after her departure, specifically the financial struggle and the way Will Smith's radio comments sank her career. And yeah, the two of them finally sat down in 2020 on the HBO Max reunion special where she forgave him, but man, you could see the pain in her eyes 27 years later. I don't know everything that happened behind the scenes, but that show was a turning point for her in a very negative way. And somehow that tells you everything about how culturally relevant this show really was. The same tensions it explored on screen were playing out in real life behind the scenes. Fresh Prince wasn't just reflecting the culture, it was living it.